Drop everything now, folks, because a new episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown has just come out. There's a lot to talk about, including the Reds, the Guardians, the Columbus Crew, and FC Cincinnati, who are all doing exceptionally well right here in July. It's all going down right here on Buckeye Sports Breakdown. Hello, everyone. I'm Mihir Simhasan, your host, and welcome back to another episode. Before we get to all of those four teams, let's start off with the quick hits. We've got three interesting ones, so without further ado, let's get to it. And we start off with the U.S. men's national team, which will be heading to Cincinnati this weekend for the Gold Cup quarterfinals. They've got an interesting battle against Canada this weekend in a rematch of the 2023 CONCACAF Nations League final from earlier this year. The squad includes two FC Cincinnati players, Brandon Vasquez and Matt Miazga, along with one Columbus Crew player in Aiden Morris. And it's going to be pretty good overall, in my opinion, at TQL Stadium. What I've seen out of this team, the U.S. men's national team, pretty solid overall, not as much as the A team, which we saw at the Nations League and which we saw at the World Cup. But it should be an interesting battle against Canada. Tickets are very expensive, though. They're going for about $250, $300. Sure to be electric at TQL, sure to be electric in Cincinnati. So let's head from Cincinnati to Las Vegas, where the Cavaliers have started their NBA Summer League campaign for this year as they beat the Nets 101-97. Close game overall, and a lot of guys who were on the team last year and a lot of new guys coming up the ranks. So it's good to see those guys combine. It will be interesting to see who can really show out right now and maybe even show out come October when the NBA season starts up. And finally, for our quick hits, Bengals punter Kevin Huber is retiring after a 14-year career. One of the few guys on the team that has been on the team longer than I've been a fan of the Cincinnati Bengals. So all I say to Kevin Huber is thank you. Thank you for all the work you put in through the ups, through the downs. I mean, this team's been through a lot, and one guy's been through the thick and thin is Kevin Huber. He understands what it means to be a Cincinnati Bengal, understands what it means to be a Cincinnatian. Really proud of the career he's had, and good luck in retirement. So on to the Reds, and there's one thing that the Reds did this past week, or they have been doing this year, that has not been done since 1976. And that's the fact that they've won 7 consecutive road series. Now, you may remember that 1976 was the time of Pete Rose and the Big Red Machine, and they ended up winning the World Series later that year, sweeping the Yankees to get the world title. And they followed it up with a huge series, absolutely huge. And I know, like, if you've been listening over the weeks, you know, like, during June when they hosted the Brewers and Dodgers at home, I said this is a big week. Maybe this is a chance the Reds can show their contenders. I said it when they hosted the Braves at home. This is a huge week to show they are contenders. And then they actually followed it up by going to the Orioles. But I think in terms of teams, this is not the biggest because the Brewers do not have the best record. Neither do the Reds. They're neither nor close to the Braves nor the Orioles. That being said, though, there's a lot to make of this series because of how coded the NL Central is. And I think with that, it also shows where the NL Central could be. Here's why. The Reds currently sit at a pretty interesting difference. They went into the series at a 2-game advantage. They lost yesterday 7-3. So now that's down to 1 game, and that gets a little concerning down the road. But this is where you need to have the show what you got type mojo if you're the Reds, especially after a 4-game sweep at the Nationals, which, I mean, it's tough either way. It's tough to pull a 4-game sweep in this league. Very few teams have done it this year. This is a chance for the Reds to maybe get an 8th series win, but I think just to get a win at this point. I mean, obviously, Andrew Abbott did not do well on the mound, and it felt like it was coming, right? I mean, he's not going to go out and have 0 earned runs and have a 0 ERA every time. It was inevitable that way. I don't really blame Abbott when it comes to the performance. You know, as a rookie, those appearances are going to happen. That being said, you have such a close margin, and that too, so close to the All-Star break, a chance to maybe get one last gasp of momentum, right? You know, ever since they've called up Elly De La Cruz, the Reds have been one of the hottest, if not the hottest team in baseball right now. And where they are right now really shows what they need to do going into the second half of the year and what they need to do this weekend. Get on the mound, get something going. Most of all, show some command because this is going to be a big series. Even going into it, 2 games against the Brewers, you sweep them, they're up to a 5-game lead. However, if you get swept, the Brewers will be in front and they'll have a 1-game lead going into the All-Star break, which is not necessarily that good. The other reason why I bring it up because of the fact that there's a wild card chase, and then there's the Miami Marlins, who are absolutely electric right now. They could be fourth. You have the Dodgers, who could be fifth, the Giants, who could be sixth. As it is right now, or rather, you have the Giants, who could be sixth. You have the Phillies, who could be seventh, could be sixth as well. I mean, there's so many teams coded in there, which brings me to my next point. There's a good chance, knowing the high caliber of the wild cards this year, there's a high chance that whoever gets second in the NL Central does not end up making the playoffs. There's a good chance that way. So when I see that, the NL Central is the best way the Reds get in. So I talked about that. And then there was the other side of things where you get in, but you're the 3rd seed, you're the lowest division winner, and then you've got to play a 6th seed. And we saw what happened last year when the Cardinals won the NL Central, ended up playing the Phillies. Phillies ended up winning that series and then ended up making a run all the way to the World Series. That's how MLB playoffs work. The midseason, or rather, October's like that. October is like that at times. And that's the question for the Reds is, do they get the momentum going? After what has been a great stretch, do they keep it going into August and September? And for all you know, do they take the D-backs down? Going into the games yesterday, there was a 1-game difference between the Reds and D-backs. Now, that's been separated a little bit because the Diamondbacks beat the Pirates yesterday, whereas the Reds lost. But that's a good chance that if the Reds get the 2nd seed, they don't have to play some of those wild cards. In other words, they could get an easier battle down the stretch. Yes, they did play the Dodgers and they beat them. Yes, they played the Marlins actually on the road and they beat them. They play the Giants on the road. They could beat them. Phillies at home and ended up not winning the series. But you think about it, there's so many factors in all the teams I've mentioned that have changed since they played. The Dodgers series was June. I mean, that was the start of the Elly De La Cruz era. Miami was in April and May. Philadelphia, both times they played the Phillies, was in April. So much has changed in both of those programs that you can't really go back and say head to head. I mean, as a broadcaster myself, where I'm known for doing prep, it's almost a little confusing and say like, well, knowing the way those two teams have played, you can almost throw stats out the door because not too much of what we've seen matters overall. So that's there. And again, if the D-backs do end up coughing it up and the Reds end up getting the 2nd seed, pretty good, right? Pretty good. You get to host an NLDS series at home. I think it's a pretty good mark, if you ask me. So now we're looking at that. Of course, we've got this weekend. You got the All-Star break. Historically speaking, in the NL Central, last year, the Cardinals, who ended up winning the division, were half a game back from the Brewers at the All-Star break. They ended up going on a good run and ended up winning the division. The past 6 seasons, not including 2020, the leader at the All-Star break went on to win the division. That included every year except 2018 and 2019, where the Cubs were up at the All-Star break in terms of the division lead, ended up choking it away. In terms of the Reds, I actually did a research and said, when was the last time the Reds were in charge of the division going into the All-Star break? So I did some research. 2021, a lot of people made noise about 2021, how they were saying this is the Reds team that could get them back. There's so much hope. And then, of course, Winker and Castellanos are out the door. But nonetheless, in 2021 at the All-Star break, they were 5 games behind the Brewers. 5 games, which is crazy. 2014, 1.5 games behind the Brewers, who were in first, but they ended up following it with a 25-42 after the All-Star break, which was the 2nd worst stretch in the MLB after the break that year, which is insane. Not in a good way, too. 2013, they ended up going to the wild card that year. They had about 4 to 5 games behind the Cardinals, who were in first. Even 2012, the last time they ended up winning the NL Central, they were a game behind the Pirates. So in this record, in every year that has had an All-Star break. So that is every year since 2020, or rather, every year except 2020. 2010 was the last time the Reds led at the All-Star break, and they were 2 games up on the Cardinals. That's crazy. 2010, 13 years ago, when Speak Now officially came out, and now Speak Now Taylor's version is out. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy how times can change. So let's take a look at this. Diversity of the team. Obviously, you talk about the big guys here and there, but I want to bring up obviously Jonathan India homers, Joey Votto homers, De La Cruz homers, get one over 450 plus. Nick Senzel. This is a guy that I almost had to like second think myself. I almost had to rework my thoughts after that Thursday game, because here I was saying, if there's one guy the Reds get rid of, it's Nick Senzel. He's making over $2 million, contrary to a lot of these guys who are still in their rookie contracts in about 700,000. I was like, Senzel's out the door. He follows it up with a catch at the wall on Thursday in the ninth. So basically save it, because the Nats had runners on bases. If Senzel doesn't catch that, game's over. Nationals win. And then he follows it up with a 2-run shot in the 10th inning. First batter up, too. First batter up in extras, and he sends it yard. This guy's clutch. And again, this is a Nick Senzel that we have not seen in a very long time. And it was quite pleasing to see that today. Everybody is showing up on this team, which is amazing. And I think at the same time, July 31st is one date that I think Reds fans will be holding their breath at, because it's almost like, I'll give this example. It's probably not the best example, but it's like Dance Moms, right? Crazy show unto itself. But the same thing with the Dance Moms, they keep on competing. They're like, all right, who's got the best option? Who's best for the team? And you almost have the pyramid scheme going on. Who knows? I should probably do a TikTok of that. That would be pretty dope. But nonetheless, like, that would be really good. Like, it feels like the Reds are in a pyramid scheme right now. Anybody who steps to the plate can perform well. And the question becomes, if you're the front office, is who do you see that's going to be long-term? Of course, McLean's going to be long-term. De La Cruz is going to be long-term. But then there's a lot of people that are a little questionable. Stevenson, maybe, maybe not. Well, Stevenson, I think, could stay. Then the question becomes, who goes? Does Casali walk? Does Maile walk? Does India go? That's been another question, too. Jonathan India may be going out the door. So many interesting moves that the Reds could make come July 31st. Not to mention, too, they've got the number 7 overall pick in the draft this year. And there's been a lot of talent from what I've heard. So you never know who could be added to the farm. MLB Network actually did a good feature on this, where they were saying there are 6 new guys that have basically built the team from many different aspects, from the draft, from free agency, from the international group for Ellie De La Cruz. Basically mentioned all the guys: Frito, Fraley, McLean, De La Cruz, Benson, and Steer. And it's almost similar to the Bengals, I was thinking, where it's like you've got guys in the draft like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and then on the other side, you've got guys from free agency, right? Trey Hendrickson comes on in. Jermaine Pratt keeps on showing up, right? And even some guys that you've been able to train over the years, right? Like Von Bell and Jesse Bates. There's so many guys that can really show up on that team. And I think that that's incredible overall, where they were basically saying, like, they showed the numbers, and the commentator for MLB Network said the Mets and Padres, who have some of the highest payroll this year, would kill for that type of production. Surprisingly, both of them are below 500, but that's a talk for another day. Just absolutely amazing down the stretch. And you can see where, in ways, and I think I saw this on Thursday, even on Monday too, where Maile picks off the guy going to second. There's a type of play within this team where, I don't know, maybe it's just good skill level, just good confidence. Maybe it's just the young and hip culture thing that Joey Votto talked about with Jim Day. It just seems like there are some plays that happen that would just never happen in any other season. Like Maile picking him off. Senzel, the turnaround from that guy, from Nick Senzel, mind you, not from De La Cruz, not from India, from Nick Senzel, a guy who's been in the shadows ever since these moves have come in. And that's where I'm like, this is a really interesting team. This is a really interesting team down the stretch. Not to mention, now that I think about the depth of this team, Stuart Fairchild, when's the last time we've heard of him? Will Myers. And the only reason why Will Benson gets called up is because Will Myers has some problems, and now he's in AAA. Not to mention those guys. I mean, honestly, those guys, I wouldn't be surprised if they walk because they need to make room for CES and a lot of other guys who are coming up in the system. It's just amazing what this team can do. Not to mention the pitchers. Hunter Green is on IL right now. Graham Ashcraft was making his second appearance in 6 days, did a great job. Brett Kennedy on 4th of July made his first MLB appearance in 5 years. And it wasn't announced until hours before the game, mind you. This team is something else. This team is something else, and I enjoy being on the ride for it because, oh boy, if this continues after the All-Star break, this is going to be a season to remember for the Cincinnati Reds. All right, so let's go up the I-71 to the Guardians, who are also doing pretty well for themselves. And we'll start off with them in the pitching department. We talked about the Reds, where it's been a little hit or miss at times, especially in who ends up showing up. The Guardians have done pretty well. They've been consistent, and most of all, they've been strong. One of the best bullpens in the country right now, if not the best. Take a look at this, which I saw from the Guardians' Instagram. Second in ERA right now in 3.12. Second in batting average, that is opponent's batting average, in .219. First in whip with 1.16, and first in home ERA with 2.28. Kind of backed it up well, beating the Royals 3-0 last night. One thing that has given this team down the stretch a lot of hope, I think, has been their pitching crew, right? That's what got them into the playoffs last year. What kept them close? What helped them beat the Rays? What helped them stay close against the Yankees in the ALDS, right? It keeps them in contention for the division right now, trying to go back to back, trying to maintain a culture too. I mean, that was the biggest question was, can the Guardians show up and maintain said culture down the stretch? It's amazing. It's amazing what we see right now. So they were 4-2 this past week. Won against the Royals Thursday, beat the Cubs. Rather, they won the series against the Cubs on the road. 1-2 against the Braves, which is a little scratchy, but I wouldn't be that hypercritical of it, knowing the Reds basically did the same thing. The one thing, though, it's like, yes, the pitching's good. Shane Bieber, not too many good appearances on the mound. And the question is this more of a concern? Right, well, a couple things with the Guardians. Is this a concern going forward? Because there are a lot of rumors out there saying Shane Bieber might be traded, which may be a good thing knowing you've got a lot of the new guys coming in. Zybal's doing well. Bybee has really showed out well in his first year in the league. Maybe Shane Bieber's out the door if you're the Guardians. And I think, is this more of a concern? I mean, I look at the Reds and the pitching, but for the Guardians, I think this is more of a concern for them because the Reds have a flashy offense. Don't get me wrong. They're aggressive, they're fun, they're electric. The Guardians, we haven't really said much about their offense this year. And again, they've got Jimenez, they've got Naylor, they've got Ramirez, they've got the guys on their squad who can show out. But at the same time, it just doesn't seem as strong as what we're seeing from the Reds and other teams this year. Still, though, Brave series, 1-2, pretty good. And you're able to get a win in extra innings. So an electric finish nonetheless. But they need to go get the command this weekend, and they've done so already, taking the first 2 games. They need to take the Royals down, and not that the Royals have done anything bad to them, but it's because of where the the AL Central standings are right now, because of where the Twins are. It's a pretty close battle down the stretch if you haven't heard. When you look at the Guardians, well, let's take a look at last year. Last year, the Guardians ended up winning it. That is, they ended up winning the AL Central. However, the Twins were the ones to be in charge of that division come the All-Star break. They ended up being 4 games ahead of the Guardians, which I think is quite interesting unto itself. But when you look at how this team lines up, especially after the results last night, where the Guardians take the Royals, Orioles end up beating the Twins in Minnesota, which should be an interesting series nonetheless. The Guardians are only half a game behind. So if the cards work out the way it's working, there's a good possibility that we could see the Guardians in charge of this division come playoff time. It's absolutely mesmerized. And I think the other thing is too is like I've talked about the Reds a lot, and I've talked about their surprises, their ups and downs, yada yada yada. And I haven't given that much respect to or rather the Guardians on what they have done. And they've done a very good job down the stretch. And I think the pitchers need to show up. They have shown up so far. I mean, they're able to get the victory on Thursday. They're able to shut out the Royals yesterday. It's setting up pretty well for what should be a pretty good series. Now, the question is keep the momentum going into today and into Sunday. So I talked about last year, Twins 4 games ahead before the Guardians went 46-26 in the second half of last year. That's the fourth best record in MLB during that stretch. How about this too? Every year from 2013 to 2022, excluding 2020, the team leading at the All-Star break went on to win the AL Central. That is for every year in between. So that's 2023, 20, or rather 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. 9 seasons. The only time that did not go as planned was 2012, where it was actually the Guardians, then known as the Indians, who were up, but you had a lot of teams that were fighting for power in that division, including the Detroit Tigers, who were about 3 games behind, ended up making a run to the World Series that year. So that being said, you never know what ends up happening in this division. You never know what ends up happening down the stretch. And I think for the Guardians, they need to try to harness that energy because I think very similar to the Reds, where a lot of people are asking questions, where they're getting some results, some questionable results against teams who are right now pretty mediocre, right? Seattle's not doing as good as they did last year, right? The Astros not doing as well as they did last year. There's so many different teams that are kind of on the low down this year, whereas they're not getting that type of production, where the Guardians are starting to return to that. And I think knowing how this team plays, where they're a team that loves to play the late game down the stretch, they love to play a lot of close games down the stretch. If they can be clutch in those moments, I think we could see the Guardians be AL Central champions come October. So I talked about the Reds, talked about the Guardians. We'll be on to MLS, but first, let me take a quick break. You're watching some of the best teams in the nation, of course, the best teams in Ohio, right here on Buckeye Sports Breakdown. So I've got good news and bad news. I'll give you the bad news first. FC Cincinnati, for the first time this year, has gone winless in back-to-back games. The good news is one of those games this past weekend was a 2-all draw against the second best team in MLS, the New England Revolution. Welcome back to Buckeye Sports Breakdown, and we're talking about FC Cincinnati and the Orange and Blue, who were in a great match on Saturday, end-to-end action, a few minutes or so, almost captivated how Cincinnati was this past weekend, with the Reds hosting the NLCS appearance in the San Diego Padres, Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour in town for 2 nights. And then you have this banger of a game. End-to-end action. First half, Dominique Badji opens up the scoring before Badji scores on the other end of the pitch for an own goal. And then Gustavo Bo for New England ends up making it 2-1. Second half, though, all Cincinnati, as Badji got his second goal of the match for FC Cincinnati, that is. And then afterwards, it was a little bit downhill. Now, not too much downhill. They ended up getting the draw, but they had so much possession where they could have gotten a third goal. They could have gotten the winner, and they ended up not taking it. Again, let's take a look at what happened in this game. Again, crowd, really great. Command, really great. Absolutely electric. And I talked about this last week as well, that if FC Cincinnati were to get a result, those two need to show up, and both of them showed up. Badji, 2 great goals. Great service into the box by Yakuba on the first. Lucho Acosta with a great pass in. Badji able to get it off the turn. This team was able to take chances when they got him against New England, and I'm proud for them for doing that. But did they miss an opportunity? Did they miss the opportunity to take 3 points? And this is an unpopular opinion. People will be like, Mahir, you've got 2 of your easy starters out, including a center back and a striker. Why are you making so much fuss about it? Here's why. They had the ball. They had the momentum. You bring out Marco Angulo, who, again, I'm not a big Marco Angulo fan. You bring in Sergio Santos, and this team starts to really attack. I mean, you got Santos, you got Kubo, you've got Baji, and there's not much. There's chances, but the team lacked a final third product. And I think it was almost frustrating at the end to say, like, if you're New England, you're lucky. You're very lucky that you got out of Cincinnati with 3 points. And I think it's very similar to the first meeting between those two in Foxborough, where it ended out in a draw. But I think there was a lot left on the table, especially for Cincinnati. They didn't really show it. They had possession, not too much spark. They took the opportunities, though, when it mattered, and they got the goals. And I think the biggest question is, from my standpoint, is does Brandon Vasquez score in that situation where he's going into the middle, where he's into the box? Maybe he poaches it. Maybe he heads it, right? There's so many if, buts, and maybes where I think maybe if Vasquez was in the middle, he can easily just poke one in off a rebound. I mean, he did that with the United States when they were playing Jamaica on their first Gold Cup game, right? You've got the change to do so. Standing wise, I think that was another question that could really be a come up of what FC Cincinnati could be and what FC Cincinnati could become down the stretch. Take a look at this. FC Cincinnati is still the best team in MLS, as I've been preaching for a while. They're 44 points. They've only had 2 losses on the year. But they're right now 7 games, or rather 7 points in between them and New England. By the way, New England has now dropped to the 3rd seed as Nashville was able to get points. So now there's a 6-point difference between FC Cincinnati and the 2nd place team. Had Cincinnati gotten that win, they're up to 46 points. That's 8 points, which is a big difference, right? Where Nashville is now just 2 wins away. Nashville gets 2 more wins than FC Cincinnati, who ends up losing. There you go. Nashville takes the Supporters' Shield. They end up taking the Eastern Conference. So there's so many different questions you can ask about this team and what could be in store for them down the stretch. I think this team could really show up down the stretch if they show what they can do. And I think, yes, some of it is there. And I think the question with this team, and I think some of it goes back to the fact that after the Gold Cup ends, which will be on July 16th, hopefully US is in the final. So we would be in that situation. You have Miazga coming back. You have Vasquez coming back. You're able to get a full 11 and your best 11 out there on the pitch. Right after that, Leagues Cup starts that following week. And that goes all the way till August. So in other words, you could have a good stretch where you don't play an MLS match, that too with your best squad for 2 months. What does that look like for this team? Because you think about it, Leagues Cup, there is a chance they could play MLS teams and they're going to be playing their first team. But there's so many Liga MX squads, which really mess with the ideal, the functioning, plus the fact that this is a Leagues Cup tournament. It's meant to build a fostering between MLS and Liga MX. The winners, or rather the guys towards the top, will end up making the CONCACAF Champions League, which is also a great achievement. There's so many questions that go unanswered on what FC Cincinnati can and could do down the stretch with their best squad. And again, not to mention, you have Hell is Real as the first game back. Following that, you're playing Miami FC in the US Open Cup semifinals, and that is most likely a Miami team that is featuring Lionel Messi, the greatest soccer player of our generation. So there's a lot of up and comings for FC Cincinnati, and I think we could see some of it, good and bad, tonight against Charlotte. Battle of the two Queen Cities, if you're wondering. If you're wondering, Charlotte ended up getting the name first. Cincinnati was able to take it. Looking at Charlotte FC, they're right on the playoff picture. They're at number 10. So they're the last team, or rather the first team that is not going to make the playoffs should it start today. They split the series last year, and both teams picked up a 2-0 victory at home. Karol Swiderski with a great goal for Charlotte when they ended up facing off in March. And then when they went back to Ohio in September, Lucho Acosta with a goal and then an assist as well. Charlotte is in an interesting spot because they're on a 4-game unbeaten streak, but it's 4 draws. So in essence, it depends on what we get on Saturday, right? If they win, it's an unbeaten streak. If it's a loss, it's a winless streak. If it's a draw, well, it's still a draw streak. But the fact of the matter is they've gotten some interesting results against teams. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, is Charlotte for real? This is not the Charlotte team that we saw back earlier this year that was beaten 3-0 against Atlanta at home. This is a team that drew Seattle. Seattle, by the way, who could be in the MLS Cup final at home. Drew CF Montreal, who's having a great season unto themselves at home. And then they go to the Big Apple. They get two results. First against the Red Bulls on the road, and then NYCFC on the road. Granted, in both of those two games, they were up. They ended up coughing the lead. But Montreal ended up in a scoreless draw. Sounders, that was a crazy game unto itself. And the Sounders actually were up in multiple times in that match before Charlotte ended up equalizing. So what about FC Cincinnati? They're on this winless streak. How do they rebound? How do they get command early on the road at Bank of America Stadium with about 30,000 plus screaming for the other team? And I think it starts off with the defense. The one thing that was lacking in the game against DC United was Yerson Mosquera. And I think if Mosquera can really try to space out the defense a little bit better than the way Hagelin did in DC, then I think FC Cincinnati has a chance to stop those big moments when it happens. And even though Miazga is out, they ended up playing well. Let's be honest. They ended up doing a solid job once they settled into the game from a defensive perspective. The question is, you just have to settle in earlier, because the one thing you cannot afford to do is allow the other team to score a goal, right? There have been only 2 times that FC Cincinnati has allowed the opposition to score the first goal. And both times they ended up losing. So the first and foremost, score the first goal. And with that, get your defense locked and loaded. And I think some of what we may see on Saturday could be a tie-in into what could happen on Wednesday as FC Cincinnati goes to the Red Bulls, who, again, have not been playing like the Red Bulls we've seen prior to the years. I mean, they don't have the type of power that Sacha Kljestan and Bradley Wright Phillips gave to them. But at the same time, their principles have remained the same. They still have a solid group of players. They ended up doing pretty well against Columbus, although they ended up losing. I mean, they could have ended up getting a result off a penalty kick, although it was saved by Patrick Schulte of Columbus. This is a Red Bulls team that could be dangerous, especially at home. And knowing where FC Cincinnati is, where this is almost a quandary period where you don't know where this team is. You know they're still good, but they're not as good as they were at the beginning of the year. And I think when you can try to find that space in between, that's where maybe FC Cincinnati has a chance. Again, I think some of it also comes down to the fact that FC Cincinnati ended up playing the Red Bulls earlier this year, drew 1-1 in the US Open Cup, were able to advance on penalties. Crazy game. But knowing what FC Cincinnati and the New York Red Bulls and the type of stress that the Red Bulls give the orange and blue, even when they were in the USL days, it'll be interesting to see that rivalry. And I think it should be an interesting game. I'm not as optimistic on FC Cincinnati taking a win in either one of those two places, but I think they do get a result in at least one of them. So FC Cincinnati down, one more to go in the state of Ohio, and that's the Columbus Crew, who ended up picking that 2-1 victory against the Red Bulls this past Saturday. Again, a lot of great options. And again, one of the commentators said it. They said they score goals for fun here in Columbus. And I think that's absolutely right, knowing the way this team plays. They can do whatever they want on the offensive side. Cucho Hernandez backheels it in. He was almost playing like a 9 too, even though he almost plays like a winger from time to time. Great pairing between him and Christian Ramirez. And then Manuel equalizes for the Red Bulls. Again, a great header, almost annihilates the defender like a fish out of water. It was that high. And again, that was a problem for Columbus this entire week, but with the Red Bulls and then Inter Miami, which just crosses into the box. Again, we'll talk about that later. But again, Manuel gets that. Defense had some miscommunications, but this is where you gotta credit Patrick Schulte and the type of goalkeeping he's done. I was thinking about it before I went on today. Roman Celentano, like nobody expected Roman Celentano to be the breakout guy for Cincinnati. The only reason why he got a start in 2022 on national television is because half of the lineup was out, including Alec Can, the goalkeeper. Celentano steps in, has an absolute great day against LAFC, who ended up winning the MLS Cup that year. Great performance. They end up starting him for the rest of the year. So you never know what ends up happening down the stretch. Patrick Schulte has basically done the same way. I mean, this is a team that has put up with a lot of great players, including Eloy Room, the Curacao goalkeeper, over the past few. But this guy is something else when it comes to just reading the forwards, closing in on spaces, and you think about it, you avoid the Red Bull Blues, you save a penalty, you guess right, and you have a command. I mean, lower.com field is a fortress. And this is a team that got a result against New England late there, beat Nashville there. They've got Cincinnati there later this year. There's so many possibilities with what this team can do. And I'll talk about that later when we look at the standings. So they get the win at home. 4th of July, they head down to Miami to play Inter, 2-all draw. And again, I think credit to Miami. I think Columbus did a great job. Granted, they did have the better roster. They did have the better roster. Now, Miami had Campana, Stefanelli, and Pizarro, who were playing up top, with Joseph Martinez on the bench, who ended up playing a big role. Striker showed up for Miami, and it could be really interesting to see what happens once Messi gets there. But back to Columbus. They had a more fleshed out midfield, fleshed out fullbacks and defenders, and a fleshed out forward pairing, especially with Cucho and Ramirez. They ended up doing a pretty good connection overall to get the second goal for Columbus. The first goal provided by Darlington Nagbe, who feels like every year he has like just one goal that is out of this world. And we saw it on the 4th of July, where he got a ball from outside the box and he's able to laser it into the back, almost similar to what he did in 2011, although this one was lasered towards the ground. Again, Nagbe banger per usual. And then Farsi again, who's been another great guy on the wing this year. A lot of great guys overall. I mean, I forgot to mention, but Yaya Boa as well. And I mean, he scored the winner for Columbus against the Red Bulls. He's had a great production, getting goals, getting assists, making a name for himself, especially being 26 at his peak. That's a great steal for Columbus. But back to Farsi, a great chance too to extend the lead for Columbus. Unfortunately, it was cut off. Bad first touch, and even though the ball was rolling, he ended up losing his balance. So unfortunately, not much of a chance there. But Campana, returning to the starting 11 for Miami, scored his third goal against the Crew this year. You may remember one of the few wins Inter Miami has got this year was at lower.com field, beating the Crew 2-1 earlier this year. It should just command through the air. I mean, first Campana, and then Joseph Martinez hopping on the bike with a bicycle kick to laser it in the back of the net and steal a point from Columbus on the 4th of July. Just poetic when you look at how Miami has played. But Columbus, again, the ability to create something from nothing has really showed up. It showed up against the Red Bulls. It showed up against Miami. And I think knowing how Miami played, I think this is where, like, I think in any other situation, I would say Columbus screwed the pooch on this one. But in this situation, I don't think I would say that. I think Miami actually did a really good job where Joseph Martinez played at his best. Leo Campana played at his best. Lionel Messi is coming. If he plays half as good as what we saw at the World Cup, I think we're seeing probably the best front three in MLS in Miami. You heard me right here. The best front three in Miami might be there. How many goals is this team scoring? Like maybe I'd say at least 1 or 2 a match. Good luck trying to shut this team out because it will be a tough time doing so. But back to Columbus. And again, I think the biggest question is I think the one thing that's really caught my eye and been a little low key, again, Cincinnati bias right here, but a little low key is a 7-game unbeaten streak for this team. Right now, they're 4th in the East. So if the playoffs started today, they would actually be hosting a series. Now, obviously, it's a best of 3 where the higher seed hosts first, then they go to the lower seed. If a game 3 is needed, then they go back to the higher seed. But nonetheless, 4th in the East, 35 points. That's tied for the 4th in MLS with St. Louis City SC, by the way, who is number 1 in the Western Conference, 3 points behind Nashville, who is in 2nd. That's insane when you look at how Columbus has played. There's a chance we could see a hell is real matchup, 1 versus 2 for the Eastern Conference final. I'm shaking my head just thinking about it. That would be crazy. So, box, protect the middle. If someone's in that 6-yard box, clear it, and someone get a defender who cannot be annihilated by a striker, because I think that's what this team needs down the stretch. Again, not too much concern on my part for the offense. They're playing like one of the best in MLS right now. If they keep doing what they're doing, I think they're still going to turn out results, especially on the home and on the road. So that's it for Buckeye Sports Breakdown. Again, my last Buckeye Sports Breakdown episode here in my childhood home. What a ride here. I've been living here for 16 years and then came back, lived in Cincinnati for 17. So again, thank you to the South. Thank you to Cincinnati. Thank you for everybody who has tuned in to Buckeye Sports Breakdown, especially today. Don't worry, we're still going to keep up the series once we get out to Phoenix, including next week. I'm Mahirson Hassan. Hope you guys stay dry. It was actually pouring rain earlier today. Hope you stay dry, and as always, stay safe.